Hey everybody, it's Bari Norman, head counselor at Expert Admissions. It is a funky year in more ways than one, and Expert Admissions has certainly not been spared. And so I'm here today to talk about how this year's application cycle is going to be different and how we can help high school seniors navigate it. So let's start with test optional because that's by far the biggest change. We've got a majority of U.S. colleges and universities going test optional this year, about 3/5 of them, in fact. And the big question is, what does that mean? What does that mean in terms of should you take the tests? Should you submit your scores? Is it going to be easier? Is it going to be harder? So first things first, test optional really does mean test optional, and that means that if you don't submit scores, you're not going to be penalized. It does not mean test blind, however, which means that you submit scores and they won't consider them no matter what. And so if you do submit scores, it could potentially help you. It also could hurt you if you're submitting scores you shouldn't. But generally speaking, the rule of thumb is that if you're in sort of that top 25% of the range, it's definitely a good idea to submit scores. If you're in range, it's really more of a question. It depends on what your overall profile looks like. It depends on the fit between you and the college. So speak to your counselor about that. But generally speaking, if you can submit scores on the higher end of the range, that would be a good thing. Now, there are going to be a lot of students this year who feel like this news is the greatest news that they've heard. They now actually have a shot at some schools that they wouldn't have bothered applying to before because they knew their scores were low, even though their grades and their courses and their extracurriculars were really great. And so they actually have a shot at some schools they wouldn't have had a shot at in other years. Now, that's great news, and students should absolutely throw their hat in the ring at places that they feel are good fits and that, that they might have been able to, might be able to get into, but wouldn't have been able to do with scores. But it also means that we're likely to see an increase in applications, and that is going to make it harder overall. And so that's just something to think about. It's going to be a little bit less predictable this year, and it will give some students a leg up in the process where they wouldn't have had a chance before, and it's going to make it harder for others. So it's not really a kind of exact science about is it going to be easier, is it going to be harder? For certain students, it will be easier at certain places, meaning just that they have a better chance. And in many instances, it's just going to make it harder overall. And so what does that mean for the rest of the pieces of the application? So grades and curriculum were always sort of the most important, at the top of the list for what college admissions officers were looking at. That's still the case, but we've got something funky in that as well. Many high schools last year went pass-fail or credit, and so there weren't grades for either like half the year or a big chunk of the year, which means that colleges have less to go on. And they do have a transcript otherwise. Many of them are going to see senior year grades, which will also be super important and always have been, but they do have incomplete information. And so they're going to use what they have. And they're also going to rely on things like recommendations, where teachers can talk not only about the kind of student you are academically, but also perhaps if there were grades that were given last year, how would you have done? And that's something that you can speak with your teacher about. If it was a grade that you got that would have been good had they reported grades, would they mind perhaps sharing a little bit about your performance last year to give some extra context? And that's something, again, that you can bring up with your teachers or even your guidance counselor for potentially in the counselor letter. But recommendations are going to matter a whole lot more. Also, your essays have always been important. It's always where they've really connected with you as a student and where you've really gotten to speak. This is going to be even more important this year, learning a little bit more about you and how to connect with you and things like that. So really put a lot of effort into that and really try to be as authentic as possible while also thinking about the audience on the other side. And when it comes to extracurricular activities, also, a part of the application that has gotten close look over the years, there was disruption at best last year. So everybody got disrupted. Some people got canceled. Some people were able to pivot. Other people were not. The most important thing is that you found something to do with your time. So it's not a free pass to say, okay, well, my sport or my activity was canceled, so I just can't do it anymore. You might not be able to do it anymore, but hopefully you found something else to do with your time, whether it's related to what you used to do or it's something entirely new. But certainly there's a lot of forgiveness and a lot of leeway, especially last spring. But by the time summer rolled around, there should have been an opportunity to figure it out. And so from there on out, the expectation is that you'll have done something productive with your time. It may not be perfectly aligned with what you used to do. It may have something more to do with responsibilities at home. It may have everything to do with what you used to do, and now you've figured out a way to do it digitally or in a new way. But no matter what, you're making a productive use of it. So remember, for test scores, see if you can take the test without, driving yourself crazy and driving through multiple states to get there. If you can take the test and do well, send your scores to the schools where you can. If you can't do it, it's okay. Make sure your list is a range of schools. It's going to be a little harder to predict this year. Keep in touch with your teachers and speak to them about the recommendations. Make sure you're doing something worthwhile with your time and keep at it with your schoolwork, and we'll help you navigate this. So stay tuned for more. I'll be coming back on here to help you navigate the different pieces over the weeks, and we're in this together. Thanks so much.